Good evening, everyone. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ASPI. I'm Fergus Hanson, the Director of the International Cyber Policy Centre here, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Ngunnawal people, who have been its custodians for tens of thousands of years and continue to enrich it through their knowledge, culture, and care for country. We're here today to talk about a topic very dear to me, the idea of establishing a hybrid threat centre in this part of the world. In think tank life, you deal with ideas every day, but not all are equal or equally as well suited to the times. This is one that stands out. It stands out as an idea whose time has come, as an idea where there is very clear demand and public policy good, and as an idea that has been powerfully made through compelling research. In December last year, colleagues of mine, Danielle Cave and Jake Wallace, wrote a blog post arguing that a regional hybrid threat centre could be a forum for collaborative, multilateral discussions on strategies, initiatives, and capacity building for countering hybrid threats here in the Indo-Pacific. I was delighted when the UK Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office agreed to support a detailed study to follow up on this blog post. And the result of that research effort, led by Dr Lesley Seebeck, Emily Williams and Jake Wallace, is what we'll be discussing this evening. And I have to give a special shout out to Emily Williams, who is producing her first report for ASPI. The format will be straightforward. We will have opening remarks from Her Excellency Vicki Treadell, the British High Commissioner to Australia. We'll then move to a panel discussion, which I'll moderate, before opening up to questions from you. Most importantly, there will then be drinks and canapes. And if your appetite for ASPI events is not sufficiently sated after tonight's event, you're in luck, because on Wednesday we have a very special one. A discussion with the Ukrainian ambassador who has just returned from Ukraine, and Anthony Galloway, the Foreign Affairs and National Security correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, who is currently in Ukraine. You can register on our website if you'd like to participate in that discussion. But I'm delighted this evening that the High Commissioner was able to deliver opening remarks, and I wanted to express my thanks for your support making this research possible. I think it speaks to the connection between our two opposite sides of the planet. While we might face unique regional circumstances, we can learn a lot from each other's experiences. And as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated so clearly, we are deeply connected. I'm also delighted that several members of the UK House of Commons Defence Committee are able to be with us tonight. It's a pleasure to host you. With that, please join me in welcoming the High Commissioner to deliver her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Fergus. It's wonderful to be able to join you all here to mark the launch of ASPI's report, Countering the Hydra. And if I may also commend the authors of this piece, Dr Lesley Seebeck, Emily Williams, and Dr Jacob Wallace, and also acknowledge the visiting members of our House of Commons Defence Select Committee. Now, if Fergus hadn't mentioned it, I would certainly have done so in the spirit of full transparency, as all legitimate proponents of diplomacy and democracy should do. We declare the funding we provide to people. Nothing behind the scenes, under the table, no brown envelopes here. And our government's funding of this report is part of our effort to have an informed dialogue on the subjects covered by this report, to get better understanding across our communities, whether business, industry, politicians, or indeed civil society. We funded this work through our Conflict, Stability and Security Fund, the CSSF, a dynamic tool which we have established within the British government, providing us with funds designed to fund creative solutions that meet the most complex national security challenges and promote international peace. Unsurprisingly, it is helping us to better focus on this region and deliver on our integrated review commitment to place greater emphasis and focus in terms of our engagement in the Indo-Pacific. Indeed, in February this year, Prime Minister Johnson announced an uplift of around Australian dollars 50 million in further funding of our CSSF program, exclusively this additional 50 million for the Indo-Pacific to support these sorts of initiatives. We don't have a full understanding of this agenda and the challenges and the dynamics and the complexities. So research and analysis like this is absolutely essential to improve our understanding and ultimately our security and our defenses. The context for such strategic investment is therefore clear. State threats to the UK and our allies and friends are growing and diversifying as systemic competition intensifies. States are becoming increasingly assertive in how they advance their own objectives and in their willingness to undermine ours. Their playbook has been to pursue malign activity that falls just short of open conflict, but where they can nevertheless threaten and interfere with our security, our open economies, our democracies, and our social cohesion, risking escalation to civil unrest, societal breakdown, cross-border or regional tensions, further risking escalation into violent conflict or even war. I think if I'd said this a year ago, people would have been skeptical. But events on the continent of Europe, with Russia's egregious invasion of Ukraine, which is visible and we can all see on our TV news every night or on whichever social media channel you use. But what is less visible are the cyber attacks, the disinformation campaigns, the harnessing of social media for the counter narrative. This is the other front line of the war that is unfolding now. Non-state actors also participate in this competition. They often use the same methods, such as cyber attacks and disinformation, to target our citizens and exploit our openness for their own gain. And states increasingly work with non-state actors to achieve their goals, including as proxies in conflict. This affords them deniability and blurs the line between state threats and other types of security threats. But we need to see them in the same focus. So we must also think keenly about the geopolitical role of non-state actors within business and industry, in particular large tech companies. In years ahead, we may well see tech inequality made more visible by the ongoing advance of digital technology. This in itself may increase social and political dissatisfaction. Governments may struggle to satisfy popular demands for security and prosperity, with trust further undermined through further disinformation. Critically, those trends are manifesting in an unbordered way. What once felt like a series of Euro-Atlantic phenomenon are playing out in this region too, and indeed globally. In that context, it's no longer appropriate to think of West and East. As Liz Truss, the British Foreign Secretary herself, said in her recent Mansion House speech, we reject the false choice between Euro-Atlantic security and Indo-Pacific security. In the modern world, we need both. This is a global challenge. As we engage more in the Indo-Pacific, for example, We not only need to understand, but respect the regional balance of power and the interest of others. As such, we as Britain will work with existing structures such as ASEAN, which remains central. That is why we successfully pursued and achieved our own ASEAN dialogue partner status and established an ambassador to ASEAN in Jakarta. And there is much more that we can do to bridge geographic zones and deliver cohesively. We must not think north-south, nor east-west, but in global terms around universal values. We must strive for a network of partnerships stretching around the world, standing up for sovereignty, territorial integrity, resilience, and self-determination, and indeed the norms and the new rules that we need to govern this new space. The UK will be an active, committed, and agile part of this network, even if only in small ways, as we have demonstrated in the funding of this report. And there is much more that we will do. So I'm excited to be able to engage on this excellent proposition by ASPI for an Indo-Pacific Hybrid Threats Center, and we will see what else we can do to contribute to its establishment and indeed to sustain it if it takes off. It is an innovative and thought-provoking concept, which I look forward to hearing the discussion of very shortly. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, High Commissioner. I don't think we could have had a better framing for this event. And we're now very fortunate to have, in this world of post-COVID hybrid events, the ability to beam in people from Indonesia and Finland. And we've got my panelists here as well. So on my far right, we have His Excellency Shingo Yamagami, the Japanese ambassador to Australia. We have Dr Lesley Seebeck, the lead author of the report, honorary professor at the Australian National University. Online, we have joining from Indonesia, Dr Fitriani Bintang Timur, who is a senior researcher at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Indonesia. And we also have Dr Teija Tiilikainen, the director of the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, based in Helsinki. To start things off, and I hope our panelists can hear us, our virtual panelists can hear us. But to start things off, I wanted to turn to you, Lesley, and see whether you could just give us a short burst of the key findings of the paper and maybe just let everyone in on what a hybrid threat is.
Thank you very much, Fergus. And I'll have to thank Emily and Jake in particular. They did a lot of the heavy lifting for the paper. I think I came in and just sort of did a bit of a gloss at the end. I don't think I can beat the High Commissioner for an articulation of what a hybrid threat is and what it poses to the region. They are all those activities that are below the threshold of conventional warfare, and using a wide variety of tools, both covert and overt. One of the things I did in the paper was try to draw out how the difference between what I call fast and slow twitch. And that's because often some of these things will just grab people's, policymakers' attention and will drive down down that path, and we can see a range of policy interventions which may actually serve the needs or the wants of the aggressor or the motivation of the attacker. And that's why I think motive is very important. So when you see this activity, you have to ask yourself, what is it trying to achieve? The tools that are available to attackers in this world are a lot broader than they used to be. They're well outside traditional national security apparatus, and they operate deep inside our economies and our societies. They erode institutions, but fundamentally they erode trust in our systems, and they introduce uncertainty and, again, that lack of trust, that lack of belief in the integrity of what we're trying to achieve. In writing the paper, I ended up coming at full circle. as we went through. And part of that was because we're in the Indo-Pacific, and the model that we were looking at was, of course, the hybrid Centre of Excellence based in Helsinki. And that I still think is very much the preeminent example of what we should achieve and what we should aim for, the elements of those that we should aim for. And of course, people came back and said, well, the Indo-Pacific and Europe are very, very different environments. Well, my response to that was, we're all interconnected. What happens in Europe, as we've seen now with the Ukraine, has a direct effect on our security and how we think about these things in the Indo-Pacific. Yes, it is much more of a maritime environment. It is a lot larger. So we have to take some of these things into account and the practical aspects of it. It is highly dynamic. But perhaps most importantly, we don't actually have the security apparatus that has been in place now in Europe over the last decades since the Second World War. We don't have the practice that is evident there through NATO and through the EU. The process of building those relationships aren't there. So we're stepping back and we have to think about how we can put something in there that builds that shared informational awareness of the threats, that shared understanding of what constitutes a threat in this environment. Second point was, again, the hybrid COE, of course, has a very strong commitment to democratic principles. And I kept being told that's not going to run in this region. Sure, there's a lot of nations in our region that do not adhere to democratic principles, but I'll be blunt. Number one, if we don't stand up for democracy, who will? Number two, even though those nations may not abide by democratic principles, they actually have benefited from democratic nations and that democratic system to get to where they are. And the third point is, again, to build that shared information awareness and understanding, you're going to have transparency, as the High Commissioner has drawn out already. You're going to have accountability. You're going to have to build trust. And so far, for all its flaws, democracy is actually the system that gives you that best, allows you to best realize that. And the final point was just the practicalities. And I tried to address some of this stuff at the back of the report, because there's nothing worse than being given a report without actually having a series of step forwards about things that you need to consider. There is a sheer breadth of what constitutes hybrid threats. It just keeps evolving and changing, which is precisely why you need ongoing research. This is not a simple fire and forget, just one-off. This is going to be something that's going to have to be sustained over a number of years to build up that understanding across the region in a decentralized way. Essentially, the way to think about this is how you build confidence-building measures in the region. And I can see this being put in place over a number of years. Having said that, the pressure on the region, the tipping points that we can see that might lead us into a conventional conflict, the overall latency is growing, and we should not let the enemy be the perfect of the good. And so, again, part of this report is let's just get in and do this now.
Wonderful. Ambassador, I was wondering if I could maybe turn to you next. I was interested in your thoughts on whether you think we need a regional hybrid threat centre here, and any thoughts you have on how we can do better in countering hybrid threats here.
Well, thank you, Fergus, for having me. And my simple answer to your question is certainly hybrid threat center is needed in this region. It is because we have seen a number of incidents involving various elements of these threats. Let's talk in specific terms. I would like to share Japan's experience with you, this issue of Senkaku Islands, because this involves various aspects of warfare or threats imposed by an aggressive country. First, there is this element of lawfare, legal warfare, because any student of international law will readily admit China's claim on those Japanese islands are just preposterous. Why? Because Japan incorporated those islands back in 1895, long time ago. Chinese government has been silent until 1971. So more than 76 years And even during that time, Americans, after the end of the World War II, controlled those islands from 1945 to 1972. During these times, American forces stationed in Japan used some of those islands as a place for shooting, bombing exercises. If any country regards it as a part of sacred territory, why didn't they make any protest during American exercise? It is as simple as that. But back in 1960s, late 1960s, UN survey, reviewed the possibility of petrol and gas deposit under the Senkaku Islands, around Senkaku Islands, and finally, 1971, as I said, they made claims. So this is like, one country comes up to Canberra and say, Thursday Island belong to us. Do you admit the existence of territorial dispute with that claimant? I don't think so. The same thing. But the Chinese government is now insisting on Japanese government admitting there is a territorial dispute between China and Japan regarding Senkaku Islands. Their narrative is consistent, persistent, and gaining strength year after year. The second element I'd like to mention here is military or paramilitary intimidation. Of course, Japanese government is not in a position to admit territorial disputes with the Chinese government. So what they do is they have started sending their Coast Guard ships to waters around the Senkaku Islands. It used to be called 332 formula. 3 times a month, 3 national Coast Guard ships of China come to territorial waters around the Senkaku Islands and stay in the waters 2 hours. But I think frequency is getting higher. The boats are getting bigger and armed. So this is a good example of consistent pressure imposed upon Japan. Third element is political intimidation. When this issue became, very heated discussion between the two governments, China one time detained 4 Japanese businessmen on the Chinese continent. Not only that, they canceled China-Japan leaders meeting without any notice. Sounds familiar to many of you here in Australia. And finally, fourth element is economic coercion. Australia is not the first country to have experienced economic coercion. Japan was one of the first. Back in 2010, when the issue became very evident, China virtually stopped their export of rare earth minerals to Japan. So the reason I am referring to these experiences is what Australia has gone through during the past 2 years is not something new to a country like Japan. In fact, there are many other countries who have gone through similar experiences, including South Korea, the Philippines, and so on. So now it's high time for us to come up with this kind of hybrid threat center so that we can share our information, share our experiences, and then coordinate our responses. And, it's better to act than simply wait. And we have to make sure gray zones do not become red zones. That is my take. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful segue into our, maybe if I could turn to you, Fitri, for an Indonesian perspective. What's your sort of reaction to this idea of setting up a regional hybrid threat center, and how do you think the Indonesian government would receive this, respond to this kind of initiative?
Thank you, ASPI, for the invitation, for having me. Congratulations, Dr. Lesley Seebeck, for the research paper. Now, from the Indonesia perspective, Indonesia and as a state are not parts of Quad, and it quite concerning when we hear that the reference to the paper is NATO. And we heard the similarity of Quad as the ASEAN NATO. And that brings us to the question, who will be the member of this hybrid threat center? Will it be specific? Will it be exclusive or inclusive? And under what principle that the countries are being invited to sit at the table? Her Excellency Vicki Treadell mentioned regarding the existing architecture in the region, which is ASEAN. From Indonesia perspective, we admit that ASEAN has been relatively slow in establishing the Center for Transnational Crime that has been on the pipeline for a decade. But it is, despite the tardiness, ASEAN member country would sit on the fence if the creation of such hybrid threat center is not inclusive, because it will be, how do I say, unwise for us to choose a side. And I think it would not be in the best of our interests, if I can stop at that. But yeah, maybe we can continue later in the discussion. Thank you so much.
It's great to get that perspective. I really appreciate you jumping in on that. Teija, I wanted to turn to you because the Centre of Excellence is obviously a model we looked at very, very closely for this report. And I was wondering whether you would agree with the proposition that it's very natural that the COE in Finland is focused on the big threat facing Europe, and we're all left in no doubt now which country that is. And I'm wondering whether it makes sense for, if you agree with that premise, does it make sense for countries based in this side of the world to have their own hybrid threat center focused on the threats that are in our region? And as a chaser to that, I was wondering what we can learn from your center if we were looking to set something similar up here.
Thank you so much for this possibility to attend this important event. First, about the need to establish another Center of Excellence, I couldn't agree more. Our center here, as was mentioned earlier, is a transatlantic Center of Excellence covering, for the time being, 32 participating states. It's open for accession to all EU and NATO members, and this far a great majority of the members of both organizations have joined the center. It's an intergovernmental body, but still autonomous from the governments to the extent that there is a steering board that accepts our work plan and budget, and it's also the will of the participating states that this center is capable of implementing its agenda autonomously, independently. The field of hybrid threats is vast. Examples of hybrid threat instruments and forms have been mentioned already in this event, but I should also remind us all that the kind of essence of hybrid threats, as the goal is to meet the target countries unprepared. We are also talking about a very dynamic threat instrument which changes its format constantly. So we need to be able to analyze and monitor hybrid threat potential, and a small center such as ours, even if it has a large membership of 32 countries, our office still is pretty small, an office of 40 experts, of course, working closely with the networks from the participating states. But from this point of view, taking into account this dynamic threat environment, the technological environment that enables a lot of adversarial activities, new and new hybrid threat instruments coming to the fore, I can only welcome another center of excellence. And we do focus heavily on Russia because of the vicinity of Russia here. But of course, also China is increasingly coming to the field of hybrid threat activities, and we see common practices being used by the two of them, and of course also other authoritarian regimes. So there is a need. I would certainly try to establish a good cooperation between our center and the new center, and we could certainly strengthen each other by cooperating closely and sharing our findings and publications and organizing joint meetings. Very briefly about what I see as the key assets of our center. I think this network-based organization is a must. So we try to share best practices. We try to pick up examples of hybrid threat activities, share the understanding and knowledge with the administrations of our 32 participating states, and of course cooperating closely with the EU and NATO at several levels. So networks is the key. We also network with academic circles, so we try to include findings from academic research and take the benefit of the work that has been done in academia on hybrid threat activities. I would also stress the autonomous role of the center, as I said. As the member states have said that we have to take some distance from the governments to be able to implement our agenda. That has also been very useful due to the growing expectations that there are about the products of our work. Of course, good partnerships outside the circle of participating states. We have engaged in joint efforts with many Asian states, and of course I hope that could intensify due to the establishment of the new center. So I'll be happy to engage in a closer cooperation and discussion when the new center moves on. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us from Finland. Lesley, we've heard some very, very strong support. We've heard some Fitri provide some perspective on how the Indonesian government might respond to this initially. I'm wondering, and you did plenty of consultations for this paper, and I think you had a spectrum of views that came from that. We know, and also know from the Finnish experience, that this takes a while to gather momentum. It can start with a small group and grow out. Could you talk to us, paint a picture of what this would look like to establish a hybrid threat center here, what the next steps could be to make that start to become a reality?
Work on the part of certainly advocates, and I'd imagine that would be particularly foreign affairs establishments, simply because it's getting people over the addressing the needs, getting them over their concerns that Fitriani's raised in particular. It's not a matter of choosing one side or another. It's building up that awareness. It's not a matter of, being in the inner or outer of, particular membership clubs. This is complementary to what's already in the region. It's not a matter of competing with some of the institutions that have been slowly built up, including by ASEAN. For example, the Center of Excellence in Cybersecurity, for example. That particular instance is probably more akin to the sort of things that we see through NATO, because it's very much a defense to the defense establishment type roles. And that's helps some of the underpinning that will actually help this hybrid threat center along, because it builds up that mutual understanding, it builds up relationships, it builds up capability. So how I see this happening is a decision being made to kick this off, starting to grow it through the networks, as Teija had said, because essentially it has to be a networked organisation in many regards. The region is just too big and the issues are too broad. There's pockets of expertise around the place that can be drawn upon, etc. But also too, a lot of this is going to be about that capacity building and that understanding, that situational awareness, getting out there and engaging in the region. And that's part of the reason why I've said this is going to take a while. We need to start moving on it now. It's also going to need sustained funding for some period of time, because we know, I mean, you take ASPI's own example, it takes time to build the IP and the capability. It takes roughly 20 years to build a discipline in a university department. Very easy to knock down, a long time to build that capability. So that's how I see that happening. It may well be that we might, have a particular focus in particular areas. There's sort of some mix of hybrid, of different models here. So one area, one university, one nation might pick disinformation, and disinformation, was widespread across the region. But we also want to build those deep wells of expertise. So you want to be able to build that capability in things like infrastructure protection, in what this means in terms of co-option of elites and criminal activities, etc. And then often it's those interactions between those areas which you're going to get some real insights that will actually be of value to the region.
I'm going to come to, I was following the clock on the back wall, which seems not to be working, so I lost a little bit of track of the time that I thought I was on. But Ambassador, I was wondering if I could just talk to you, and we'll throw it to questions, and please get them ready for any one of our panelists. But I was wondering, when you look at the war in Ukraine and how that might impact considerations relating to Taiwan, how do you see that impacting hybrid threat activity in this region, and therefore, by extension, interest in a hybrid threat center?
Well, I think on this occasion, let me quote Prime Minister Kishida's statement about 10 days ago, Shangri-La dialogue. Unlike UK, we don't have many Winston Churchills. Unlike US, we don't have many Abraham Lincolns or Ronald Reagans. But from time to time, Japanese politicians speak with strong eloquence. And this is one example. I will quote, "I myself have a strong sense of urgency that Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. Can the rules-based international order we have built through hard work, dialogue, and consensus be upheld, and the march of peace and prosperity continue? Or will we return to a lawless world where rules are ignored and broken, where unilateral changes to the status quo by force are unchallenged and accepted, and where the strong coerce the weak militarily or economically? That is the choice we have to make today." And I think we are living in a watershed moment, and we have to make sure today's Ukraine will never be allowed to become tomorrow's Taiwan. When I emphasize importance of Taiwan, some Aussies might ask, "Oh, Taiwan is so far away from Australia. East China Sea is not like South China Sea, so no, don't bother. It has got nothing to do with us." I think that's totally wrong. And if you look at the economic figures in terms of Australia's shipping industry, top 3 countries with the highest transaction value are all located in Northeast Asia. Of course, I'm referring to China, Japan, South Korea. And 5 of the world's top 10 busiest ports are located in the same Northeast Asia. All of these connect to shipping routes which pass through the East China Sea. So in terms of not only peace and stability, but also prosperity, economic development of the Indo-Pacific or entire global community, East China Sea is crucial. And here, there is a lot we can do together. By we, I'm talking about countries like Australia, Japan, but not only that, UK, US, and other like-minded countries. In this regard, I will highlight the importance of visit by your new Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and Foreign Minister to Japan, despite recommendation by President Biden to take a nap. Your new Prime Minister Albanese, didn't sleep at all, not a wink. His statement at the Quad meeting was very strong and strident, and also Deputy Prime Minister Mars commented to the effect, I will quote, "We obviously see Japan as really important to our strategic future. But what's been so gratifying about this visit, his visit to Japan, is that the feeling is reciprocated, quite so." And I think this feeling of Australia's commitment to the Indo-Pacific, including East China Sea, is shared across the political aisle. Your former Defense Minister, Peter Dutton, stated in his historic National Press Club speech the other day, he said to the effect, if Taiwan is taken, surely the Senkakus are next. So all in all, there is a great degree of consensus among like-minded countries as to we should work harder, in order to attain peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. But the lesson an aggressor must have learned throughout their experiences in Ukraine, where they have to come with much more force and faster speed when they are going to take action across the Taiwan Strait. And this demonstrates our need for redoubling efforts to achieve deterrence and to prepare for contingencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to throw the floor open. So if you've got a question, if you could raise your hand, there'll be a roving mic. If you could just say your name and ask your question to one of the panelists. Encourage you to invite our online panelists as well. So if there's questions, we have a lady just here. Thank you.
Melissa Conley-Taylor from the Asia-Pacific Development Policy and Defence Dialogue. I thought I'd continue, and perhaps it's a cheeky question. I spent a lot of last year in Taiwan and the issues in Finland. And I'm absolutely certain that if you're talking to Taiwanese, they will love this idea. They would love to be part of this. But then what would that mean for the rest of the region? And the comment that Vicki made about how we would proceed. So on that point, would you be reaching out to Taiwan?
I'm not sure if our online panelists could speak. We just might have had a mic problem. The question was, how would Taiwan be a participant? Could Taiwan be a participant in this hybrid threat center? Maybe I can direct that easy question to you, Lesley.
The simple answer is yes. And I think, again, I go back to what we're trying to achieve here is something which is almost supranational. If I could, and again, should defer to Teija being the expert, of course, is that the hybrid COE in Finland, one of its attributes is the inviolability, the fact that it is almost, it's outside, it's got its own legal provisions that holds it separate to normal, government processes. To me, that was something that really resonated and say, okay, we want to have something that we can, members of society can talk to. Yes, there is a governing board, there's a governing panel, it's natural, people are funding it. But it is that intersection between government, researchers, civil community, which I think is also really quite strong there. In terms of, again, going back to the question about how would you have the inclusivity of it, I think you just start opening it up. You start building it and you let it evolve organically, noting that the benefits of this are not going to be just restricted to the members alone. Having that broader view of what's going on and being able to provide insights, those are the sort of insights that are going to be available to a whole range of different nations, and similarly with the capacity and capability building as well.
We have a very active online community as well, so I'm going to ask a question that's come through from one of our online participants, and I'm going to direct it to you, Teija, if that's okay. The question is, how can small and middle power states best resist or thwart escalatory hybrid threats conducted by regional large power states? And the question's from Owen.
Thank you so much. I think we have to be prepared. We are very much talking about the key word of resilience in our center. How do we enhance our broad societal resilience vis-a-vis hybrid threats? And that is really what I think is the asset of small or middle-sized powers, because this is, of course, also the model that is well known here in Scandinavia, north of Europe. Small countries that engage their entire populations to the effort of joint security. So it's not only security is not only about defense, it is a cross-governmental task. As was mentioned earlier, these hybrid threats interfere into the domestic sphere of states. It is about election interference. It is about affecting public opinion, manipulating information environment. It is about disturbing or attacking critical infrastructures, cyber. So we are really talking about a type of threats where a broad societal resilience and awareness about the threats and their roots is needed. So this is what I would bring to the discussion, and of course also for the new center on its agenda, how to enhance common resilience, sharing good practices, and making the society ready for this very ambiguous threat type, covert, as was mentioned, and changing its format. But another of course, thing that I would like to mention here is the need of cooperation. No state alone can counter this broad range of hybrid threat activities. It is about international rivalry. We see that the stakes are getting higher. So good intergovernmental cooperation. Of course, the European and transatlantic example is the example of the European Union and NATO, both of which are very active in this field of countering hybrid threats. Broad societal resilience, firm international cooperation. This is how small and middle-sized powers can counter hybrid threats. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. We've got a question for the gentleman here in the middle.
Thank you very much. And my question's for Fitri. It seems like there's been pretty unanimous support behind this idea from everybody here except for you. I'd love to hear more about where that skepticism about the centre comes from, I guess especially in the context of Indonesia's perspective.
Fitri, did you get that question through the mic?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. I just want to be devil advocate, I guess, because it would be very boring to attend, an event where everybody kind of cheering for the idea. So yes, I guess Dr. Lesley rightly mentioned there is a growing hybrid threat, disinformation, fake news that leads to human rights abuses, genocide in the region. The maritime dispute that is reflected in cyber realm, also issues of political election interference. So there's no doubt there's a need for such center, but this region has been have its own share of centers. So it's not about adding more duplication, but how would this center convince that it will not take the resource from the already existing multilateral cooperation in the region, and it will not increase the polarity of tension in the region. Therefore, I ask about the inclusivity, whether it will be really open. And I think if it's really open, if it's inclusive and it's useful for the development of, for example, early warning and preventing threat mitigation, lowering tension, that'd be useful. And give me the forum, I'll join. But if it's only bringing the Quad in track 1.5 discussion, and meanwhile we have ASEAN Regional Forum, all the center under it, like AHA Center, Center for Counterterrorism, Center for Financial, and what for? It's just swaddling the resources that is depleted. So that's just my comment. Thank you so much for the question.
Thanks so much, Fitri. Question here, the gentleman at the front.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, everyone. So my name's Paul Buckley. I'm from TLR Global. One of the things that I'm tracking in my current role is the rapid convergence between hybrid threats and kinetic warfare, noting the short timelines that defence and government is accelerating for the higher likelihood of the development of kinetic warfare, and the precedents we've seen recently of hybrid cyber threats, state-based actors obscuring their role in attacks. Where do we see, 20 years is a long time to achieve a significant outcome. Even 10 years is a long time. Have we left it too late for the establishment of such a centre?
Never. Who would like to jump in on this?
I'll
Lesley.
start. I think it's never too late. So start now, number one. Number two, there are things you can probably do in the short term. And I'll give you the example of what, and again, I'm well aware that this is not quite what we're talking about, but what the UK and US intelligence agencies did in lead up to Ukraine. So had, again, used their intelligence assets, got ahead of the game here. I think the more, and it's a good illustration of the more you can actually shine light on some of these activities, the better you're going to be. Similarly, in the area of things like lawfare, economic coercion, the more that sort of activity is drawn out, and the better the region is going to be, and the more resilience you can build. And finally, in terms, a lot of these activities are actually directed below that state of the nation state, normal apparatus. We can see things like lawfare, the international court, we can see economic sanctions, etc., but also being able to draw out what's happening below that at the level of individuals, because some of these things are targeting journalists. A lot of those people who don't necessarily aren't fitting into that nation state apparatus, and drawing that out, I think, also will help build resilience in the states.
Anyone else would like to jump in? Yes. Oh, if you could just wait for the mic, thank you.
G'day, my name's Xavier Wilkes. My question is, given that these hybrid threats seem to be predominantly asymmetric, they're potent because of our business as usual, they target against the business as usual, how do we avoid entrenching a reactive mindset in responding to them?
Could we direct that to our International Centre of Excellence Director? Would that be okay, Teija?
Yes, thank you so much. So how do we create a more proactive approach? How do we take the lead in this game? If that is what the question was about, I think this is the key question. We are reactive, and we create our resilience and the tools as we learn. So instrument by instrument. There is an instrument of instrumentalized migration used, as we saw last autumn by Belarus against 3 European Union countries. The same instrument was used against Finland by Russia earlier, so using migrants as a political tool. It is only when we experience that, when we start the discussion in our framework, so what should we do next time? How do we prevent that? How should we cope with such a situation? So we are pretty reactive because we aren't we didn't expect those kinds of measures. This is exactly the goal, as I mentioned. The goal of these hybrid threat activities is to meet the target state or society unprepared, because they are asymmetric. The actors behind them want to balance the asymmetric power relationship. So they used cost-efficient instruments which are complicated for us, and they exploit our values and our legal commitments. So how to better anticipate what might be coming? This is very difficult, but I can only refer to my previous observation about broad societal resilience. The more generally resilient a society is, and it would take me 2 hours to introduce to the broad topic of resilience. What does that mean in real terms? Trust in government, less extremism, less polarization, a consensus society, and all of that. But also good public awareness about the threat environment. So the answer can only be that the better general resilience there is in a society, and then the key qualifications for resilience at place, the better a society can also take a little bit of more proactive approach to hybrid threats. But these discussions are ongoing at the international level, in groups, among groups of like-minded countries. So again, we get back to the need of international cooperation here. But this is an important question, I think. Thank you so much.
Did you want to jump in on that? Well, thank you so much. I get the sense from the discussion that there's a genuine restlessness for this idea. It's there's clearly, as Fitriani has pointed out, some divergences of views, but I think you've done a brilliant job, Lesley, and your team of articulating what this centre could look like, the role it could play in this region. And I think we've had a fantastic discussion about the different ways it works in practice on the other side of the world in Europe, and some of the challenges that we face here in this region, whether it's Australia, Japan, or Indonesia. I sense also a restlessness in the room. We've had champagne corks being popped and canapes being braised. I'm very sorry we cannot invite our online guests to join us, but I just wanted to ask you all if you could join with me in thanking our incredible panel and the High Commissioner for launching today's event. It was a real gift to us to be able to do this research, and I think a wonderful piece of work that's come from it that has got a long way to travel. So thank you all very, very much for giving your time for this evening, and please join us for canapes and drinks outside.